Joe Califano Jr. at the Carter Library.
Thank you very much, Lou. As Lyndon Johnson said, that I think it was at Baylor University, and they got an introduction that even he thought was glowing. I wish my mother and father were here. Listen to what you said. My father would have enjoyed it, and my mother would have believed every word. And thank you, Clyde, and thank you, Madam Ambassador. Love him or loathe him, Lyndon Johnson knew how to make Washington work. And he's widely regarded for that, even by people who don't like how he made it work or what he made it work on. And I say now, and I say a little bit in the introduction in the book, we are today living in Lyndon Johnson's America. Why do I say that? Just think for a moment. 60% of the men and women in college today are there on this loan grant or work study program. So-called Pell Grants, which is named after the senator when they were reauthorized. Started bilingual education. We have 70 bilingual education languages in this country today. Head Start, to talk about preschool education, started Head Start, the first aid to elementary and secondary education. In health today, Medicare covers almost 60 million people, and Medicaid covers 70 million people. And 2/3 of all nursing home care is paid for by those programs. And food stamps, of course, 45 million people on food stamps, started in 1965. And immigration reform. In 1965, in this country, we had something called the National Quota Act, which by and large limited immigration to Northern Europe and the British Isles. LBJ decided to reform that law and opened America to the world. You want to know the impact of it? In 1965, 85% of the immigrants to this country were from Northern Europe or the British Isles. Today, 85% of the immigrants to this country are from Asia, Central and South America, Africa, the Middle East, and Southern Europe. In civil rights, I think you're all familiar with that, the '64 Civil Rights Act prohibiting discrimination in employment and public accommodations, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and in 1967 the Fair Housing Act. The environment, the first Clean Air Act, the first Clean Water Act, the first Solid Waste Disposal Act, the first Motor Vehicle Pollution Act, highway beautification, and thousands and thousands of miles of scenic rivers and trails, all passed during those years. And nobody thinks of Johnson as having much to do with the arts. In fact, I can remember one evening in New York when we were listening to Anna Moffo at Arthur Goldberg's apartment, and I thought Lyndon Johnson would climb out of the seat sitting there. But think about this, the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. Washington had wanted a performing arts center for about 20 years, but no, it was a black city and there was no way Congress was going to have that. And LBJ said, name it after John F. Kennedy. We a great tribute to John Kennedy. And passed it in January of 1964, in a week before he even gave a State of the Union message. And then, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, the Renwick Gallery, the American Film Institute, the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars, all started during those years. And the National Endowments for the Arts and Humanities. What do they mean to this country? Over the years, they've supported or funded or started 1,800 theater companies, 800 symphony orchestras, and chamber groups, almost 500 dance companies, and more than 100 opera companies. So you have this in every little city in the town. And then the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, public TV, 350 public television stations, and almost 900 public radio stations. And those years, we tend to forget, of Johnson's presidency, the country was morphing from corner grocers and local pharmacists and local banks and small retailers into supermarkets and national drug chains, national banks, national retailers. And he passed a couple of dozen consumer protection bills. Truth in Packaging and Lending Products, the Product Safety Commission, Highway and Auto Safety, and Wholesome Meat, Poultry, and Fish, and the Child Safety Act. The Child Safety Act, incidentally, came out of, he was trying to get in touch with me one day, and as Tom Johnson well knows, he didn't like it when he couldn't get you immediately the other end of the phone. And I was at a hospital, I was in the emergency room at Sibley Hospital watching and the president, what are you doing there? I said, well, my son Joe swallowed a bottle of aspirin. And they're pumping his stomach out. And LBJ said, he expressed his sympathy. He said, but those damn bottles, he said, they shouldn't be so easy to open. There ought to be something that makes them hard to open. That's the Child Safety Act that makes it so difficult for all of us to open those how did he do it? I mean, how did he achieve so much in a relatively short period of time? He knew how important the presidency was. He knew how important Howard was, using it properly. He had laser-like focus. He was courageous. He worked around the clock. He knew laws were not self-executing. He worked with opponents, and he worked, and he knew the forces in this country. Let me just give a couple of illustrations. We had talked in the United States before Johnson became president about aid to elementary and secondary education. The federal government at least providing some money to these schools. It had been impossible to pass, and was when he became president. The Catholics were able to block the legislation unless there was aid to parochial schools, and the evangelicals and the secular urban Jews were opposed to aid to parochial schools. We're never able to break that up. And it was further complicated because of the chairman of the House Committee on Education was Adam Clayton Powell, who was black, and Johnson had just passed the Civil Rights Act in '64. He passed this. So the question was what to do. Well, a variety of things. One, he talked to Adam Clayton Powell, and he said, Adam, everybody, as long as everybody thinks this is a bill for blacks, Negro was the term in those days, for Negroes, we're never going to get it passed. You got to get out of town for a while. Remember Bimini? Adam Clayton Powell went to Bimini, and he never returned to Congress. But, and get somebody else to take the lead on this. And Hugh Carey, then a congressman, eventually to be governor of New York, Brooklyn congressman, took the lead. And then Carey came up with an idea. Lease books, non-sectarian books, and equipment to parochial schools. And Johnson said, that'll do it. But he still couldn't move anybody. And there's a wonderful picture I have in my home in Connecticut of standing on the pool, the White House pool. It was so hot in that room, humid and hot, and the president, Cardinal Spellman, who was the premier cardinal in the United States, Catholics for those days, Billy Graham, and Arthur Goldberg. And George Christian and I are off in the distance a little bit, or I think it's George or Bill Morris. And the president is, and they're not wanting to take this compromise. And it was so hot in that room that even through the black cassock Spelman had on, you could see the sweat. And finally, they agreed. Johnson got the bill, and the bill passed the Senate and the House, and then he said, hold up sending it to the White House, because he was going to be away. He said, and in a couple of weeks it'll be Hugh Carey's birthday. And I wanted to sign the bill on his birthday to show him how much I appreciate what he did. Okay? That's the kind of thing that he did. And of course with Dirksen, it was constant love and kisses. Dirksen, he would meet with Dirksen, of course they'd have drinks. There was Dirksen loved bourbon, Johnson drank scotch. Every time a drink was served in the Oval Office, Dirksen got 1.5 ounces, and LBJ got 1/2 ounce. There's a wonderful phone conversation in which Dirksen calls President Johnson right after the election in '64. There's a tremendous landslide, and to congratulate him, and LBJ says, I wouldn't want to be here if you weren't going to be here. I would rather have lost. And Dirksen says, you know, I'm calling because I'm going to have some surgery, and I want to make sure that if you're going to have a leadership meeting, I wait until after you have a leadership meeting. LBJ says, Everett, I would never have a meeting without you, and we're going to have the surgery. And Dirksen says, at Walter Reed. And Johnson said, isn't that wonderful, Everett? You and we can go to Walter Reed. They take care of us, the doctor's there. Wouldn't it be great if we could do this for all the elderly in this country? And he starts talking about Medicare, and Dirksen says, now, Mr. President, before you can get beyond that, Johnson says, and you know, Everett, voting rights. I'm going to have a voting rights act this year. I'm going to send it up. I need you on this. He said, Mr. President, I can't be with you on that. And eventually in the conversation, LBJ says, Everett, you come with me on the Voting Rights Act, help break this filibuster. And 100 years from now, there'll only be 2 people from the state of Illinois Americans will know, Abraham Lincoln and Everett Dirksen. There was another side when he was dealing with them. I mean, there were when we wanted to, Lady Bird went to Connecticut and saw the Persian sculpture. Joe Persian had all this sculpture out in his garden and art, and he was a Latvian Jew. Lady Bird came back and said, he's ready to give it to the government. It's fantastic. We've got to do it, Lyndon. But he does want a museum named after him. And that became a real issue with Claiborne Pell, who was a descendant of the Lords of Pelham, and who just said couldn't handle that and said, no, it's got to be the Smithsonian Museum, the Smithsonian. And the President sent Harry McPherson and me up to talk to Pell. We had no impact on him, so he brought him down to the White House. He had a little green office next to the Oval Office. And Pell was in the office, and Pell explains, everything should be, should be called Smithsonian, what have you. Johnson argues back, but finally LBJ, in that piercing way he had, he said, Claiborne, let me tell you something. I want the American people to see this sculpture. And the only way they're going to see this sculpture is if we name it after this guy. Now, I don't care if we call it the Horseshit Museum. I want this sculpture for all Americans. And Pell was so shaken. Didn't agree, but the next day he called Harry McPherson and said that he would go along with the president on this bill. He also had Frank Church, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who opposed him on the war and other problems. And Church came to say to Johnson, you know, Mr. President, Walter Lippmann. Walter Lippmann was the great columnist of that era. He's really a super columnist by any standard. And Walter Lippmann says this and Walter Lippmann says that. And Johnson said, Frank, let me tell you something. The next time you want a dam on the Snake River, call up Walter Lippmann. We had a terrible battle over, we got, in 1968, I guess it was, we needed to increase the debt limit, so, and we thought we had the votes, but 6 Democrats voted against us, and that we didn't expect. So we had this meeting in the, we got to turn it around, we have to have the money. And one of the Democrats, Richard Ottinger from Westchester County in New York, beautiful county in New York, when he was talking against it, said, you know, the war is taking money, there isn't enough money for public housing or this or that. And Johnson says, Joe, call Ottinger. Tell him we got plenty of money for public housing. We're going to put the biggest goddamn public housing project in the history of this country right in the middle of his fancy Westchester. We got his vote. He had a linger on this. He had a marvelous sense of humor, and there's so many things I won't. It's such great material that he's given. It's not why the book is great because the material is so good. Mark Hatfield was the governor of Oregon, and Hatfield was the problem for us, not only on foreign policy but on several domestic programs. And he had a way of getting under the president's skin. And I was watching a religious show one Sunday morning in the living quarters with the president, and Hatfield was on the show. And he was interviewed, and Hatfield, in the course of the interview, Senator Hatfield said, Oregon is so beautiful that sometimes when I'm driving along the road, I just pull over to the side of the road and get down on my knees and pray. And the president turns to me and says, let that be a lesson to you, Joe. Don't ever trust a son of a bitch who pulls over to the side of the road. Lastly, I can't. The worst week of the Johnson presidency was the week in which Martin Luther King was assassinated. Tom Johnson's here tonight. He actually brought that message to President Johnson when he was meeting with Mr. Woodruff in the Oval Office. And the president said, you've got to move into the White House and stay at the mansion. And we had troops in, I think, half a dozen cities. We had riots in 100 cities in this country. And I would bring him one message after another. We mean, Dallas, whatever it was. And we had troops in Washington patrolling the streets. And I got this, I get these messages from the FBI every half hour or so. And I bring over this one message. And it says, Stokely Carmichael of Black Firebrand is organizing a mob at 14th and U to march on Washington and burn it down. March on Georgetown and burn it down. And Georgetown was where all the TV commentators and the columnists in the Washington Post people lived. And Johnson reads this message aloud and he says, God damn, I've waited 35 years. And one other thing, and then it opens to questions. He was also, he did understand Washington. He knew that when you had 535 members of Congress, all from different districts and states, with constituencies of all economic, all racial, all religious types, all political views. The president was the person. The president is the person that has to really take the lead in getting them together. And he was also very opportunistic. And I make this my last example, but he knew how to take an event. We proposed fair housing in 1966, and it was the nastiest mail I think we got was on fair housing. Could not move the bill. Tried in 66, tried in 67, tried in 68, we finally got a bill out of the Senate. Literally, Johnson, think about this, the TET, which absorbed him and absorbed the country, called Phil Hart, the senator from Michigan, and said, take that, the bill was out of committee, take that fair housing bill, you can pass it in the Senate now, right now, this week. Pass the Senate. Nothing in the House. King was assassinated. The next morning we had a meeting with the civil rights leaders, and that when they left, the president said to me, we're going to get something out of this. We're going to get our fair housing bill. And we did a letter. He did a letter to the Speaker of the House, John McCormick, did a note to Jerry Ford, the minority leader of the House, urging them to move the bill. And the reason we couldn't get the bill out of the House was because Emanuel Sella, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, a congressman from the Crown Heights district of Brooklyn, where I actually grew up, his constituents, largely Jewish community, were totally opposed because blacks were moving in, and they didn't want them moving in, and Sella wouldn't do it. And Johnson said to the Speaker, get this, take the Senate bill, get it directly to the floor, so Sella doesn't have to report it out. Then we won't endanger him getting reelected, and we'll get our bill. And they did. The swing vote, incidentally, was somebody named John Anderson, who later Republican ran for president as an independent, and they got the fair housing bill passed. He had resisted repeatedly enormous pressure to sign an executive order. And he said, this subject is so controversial, we've got to get Congress to pass it, because if you sign it, it'll be wiped out by the next president. The current book is the 1991 book. The essay is a long essay, about 8,000 words. There are in the book two things that were not in the original book. When Lyndon Johnson got on the plane after Kennedy's assassination and after he was sworn in, the first person he called was Rose Kennedy after that, John Kennedy's mother. The second person he called was Dwight Eisenhower. And he asked Eisenhower to come to Washington within the next day. Eisenhower came but said he'd rather just come and do a memo. He did a memo to him. The text of that memo, actually a photograph of it, is in the back of the book. It's a remarkable memo, and you see how much of it LBJ followed. And also a letter from Lucy Johnson. Sent me a letter the Christmas the book was first published, which is very moving and touching. There also is, with respect to Selma, a section added about the phone calls that Johnson had with Martin Luther King, and at the end, a list of all the laws. This is just, I'll end with just a little snapshot of it, so I can get it, some of the wisdom of Lyndon Johnson. This is what, can you see from over there? Yeah. Do it now, next week. And this is, I've learned in life that this is true. Jealousy and sex drive people more damn crazy things than anything else. And for those of you who are Democrats, the trouble with the Democratic Party is they're all elected. this is, as Tom Johnson, I'm sure remembers, he said many times. Let me just turn it over. He did say, he also, when he got angry at the Washington Post one day, got so angry, some story they were writing, and he's, this is 1967. Lyndon Johnson proposed public financing of presidential campaigns and the disclosure of contributions. I'm reading these